Hello, this is Orlando from A Collector's Dream. Today I want to talk to you about the 1888 Goodwin Champions set. The Goodwin Champions is recognized as the N162 set. It consists of 50 cards. Each card measures 1.5 by 2 5/8. These cards were inserted in packages of Old Judge and Gypsy Queen cigarettes. Cards feature vivid full-color artist rendering of the athlete against a cloudy sky and with a white background. The player's name, last name, position, and team affiliation appear on the bottom of the card with an Old Judge or Gypsy Queen banner on the bottom within a box. There were 18 different sports represented in this set, a total of 50 cards. Dominated mainly by the baseball players. There were 8 baseball players. The main ones were Cap Anson, Tim Brothers, Tim Keith, and King Kelly, all Hall of Famers. There's also cards of Jack Dempsey, John Sullivan, Buffalo Bill, and various other sports legends. What I want to talk to you about today is the card for Beecher. Beecher, it was the first football card ever created. Harry Beecher, his real name was Henry Ward Beecher, was born in New York. He was a college football player, played for Yale University. Yale and Harvard and those Ivy Leagues were the first universities to play football in those days. And Henry, or Harry Beecher, went to Yale. He graduated from Yale in 1888. Beecher was a prominent quarterback for the Yale Bulldogs football team. He was one of the best players during those days, probably the best, and one writer called him the school's greatest ever quarterback. In 1886, he threw 33 touchdowns, which in those days, most of them was running, but 33 touchdowns was the most in 1886. In 1887, Harry Beecher was the captain of the team. And in those days, the captains also played. So he was, again, in 1887, he was recognized as the player of the year. So when Goodwin came out, they decided to make these cards from all the different sports and the best players for the different sports at that time. And they called that set the Goodwin Champions. So Goodwin ended up being the first football player and the first football card ever produced. So the way that these were printed, the rare thing about these cards is they were all hand printed. And they use a process that's called chromolithography. Today, you just call them chrome. Chrome cards, you know, today they're printed with aluminum plates and so on. But in those days, as they were called chromolithos, they were done with, not with the aluminum plates, but with limestone plates, limestone rock, literally, that was sanded smoothly. Then they would carve the various scenes or portraits into the stones. Each different color had a different stone. So they would have to carve one color out. They'd have to go ahead and put the color on there, then put the paper, press it down, one color done. Then they'd have to put the other color and so on, the other plate, all done by hand, one at a time. It was a very, very long process. It was, you know, to make that process, it's referred to as chromo, as I say, a lithographer with a finished painting in front of him were gradually created and corrected the many stones using proofs to look as much possible like the painting, sometimes using dozens of layers, depending on how many colors were actually in the actual card. So the chromolithography is a chemical process based on the rejection of water by grease. So as they applied the image to the stone, grained zinc or aluminum surfaces with the grease-based crayon or ink, the limestone and zinc are the two commonly used materials in the production of chromolithos. So basically, they would put the paint, they would put the water, and they'd put that image right on there. And what would stick would be the paint onto the actual cardboard. So you can imagine back in 1888 how difficult it is to print these particular cards. You know, accurate registration for multicolored work is achieved by the use of a key outline image and registration bars that are applied to each stone, you know, before they actually, you know, do the printing. So everything had to line up perfectly. The other thing is that they had to use different shades of colors. So each shade literally had to be a different stone that they used. So it's like, you know, so pretty much each sheet of paper will therefore pass through the printing process as many times as there are colors in the final print. In order that each color is placed in the right position, each stone must be precisely registered or lined up on the paper using a system of registry marks. So now I wanted to show you how difficult it is to print these cards and how long it took. Some cards, it took, you know, weeks to get these things printed. And that's why they're so rare and there's so few of them printed. If you compare them to any other cards in that era, the 1888 Goodwin Champions, the N162, are some of the rarest cards available because they were printed by chromolitho in full color. So I want to talk about my my two Beecher cards that I'm showing here. One of them is they're both by PSA. One of them is graded a poor 1, and the other one's graded an excellent 5. The reason I'm going to show you the one is because the front of that card is perfect. It's basically how it came out of the pack. The reason why that card is in such great condition is because that particular card was in an album. It was actually pasted in an album, and it was closed up, didn't see the light of day until it was actually torn off that album page. So technically that card was in the dark for probably over 100 years. I've had it for about close to 20 years myself. So that card has been hidden away in a photo album for many, many years. If you look at the back of the card, you can see that it's missing a big chunk of it because it was removed from the album. But the bottom line is I want you guys to take a look at the front of the card, take a look at the quality of the card and the perfect image of Harry Beecher there holding that football. Now that football almost looks like a soccer ball because in those days, you know, the balls actually had laces. They were blown up and it was almost the shape of a oval soccer ball. You know, it was pretty inflated there. It's incredible that Beecher was able to throw over 33 touchdowns one season with that big ball, you know. But anyway, that's the Beecher card from 1888. The other one is rated an excellent 5, and I put that so you can see the back of the card. The back of these Goodwin Champion cards all are the same. They all have the checklist of the 50 players in that set. And you can see that the Beecher is the only football card in that set. So now that I talked about the first football card ever created, the N162 Goodwin Champions Beecher card, created in 1888, there were no other football cards created until 1894. And 1894 was actually the first football set created. There were 35 cards in the football set, and it was called the 1894 Mayo's Cut Plug. And the designation for that is the N302. So it's the 1894 Mayo Cut Plug N302 cards that was created to be the first football set in history. The cards mostly featured Ivy League football starts of the day and are the first 19th century trading cards dedicated solely to football players. Since these cards were issued in plugs of tobacco, you know, and they had a black border, they're very, very hard to find in good condition, mostly because of the chipping on that black border. They also had a black back, so even though they're cardboard, they were painted black in the back, and they had a black border. These cards, again, were very, very, very difficult to find, and the 35 card set only contained players from the big 3 Ivy League schools, which were Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. as these colleges were by far the most dominant of the young sport of football at that time. The cards, again, were small. They were basically similar to the T206 cards. They measured 1 5/8 by 2 7/8, and these featured sepia tone portraits on a black frame that contained the player's last name and the school. And on the bottom of the card, it had the Mayo Cup Plug logo. So all of these cards were printed with the player's name and the team name on the bottom of the card. The only exception to that card is the rarest card in the set, which happens to be the rarest football card that exists. And that is the anonymous card. It was called anonymous for over 100 years because no one knew who that player actually was. And the name of the player was left off of the card, and also the name of the school was left off the card. So, my research, and I've tried to find out what happened with this card. And what ended up happening is similar to what happened with the Hannes Wagner card in the T206 set. When the card was first printed, and it was distributed that way, and then somebody noticed that the name was not on the card. So apparently that's why they pulled the card and they didn't print any more of those cards. It says, basically collectors don't know why Dunlop's name was left off the card, but it's the only card that was done that way in the set. As far as the research on how many of those cards exist, if you look at both the PSA and the SGC registry, it shows that approximately 10 total cards have been graded. But if you look at some of the graded cards, for example, my graded card of the John Dunlop card was originally graded by PSA. And somebody cracked the card, resubmitted it to SGC, and again, it shows on the PSA registry and on the SGC registry, but it's technically one card. How many of those have been cracked out and resubmitted? I don't know. I've been able to find pictures of about 5 or 6 of the actual cards in circulation. But other than that, it's basically the Holy Grail of football cards. So basically the top 2 grading companies, SGC and PSA, have acknowledged that there are just 9 authentic copies of the Dunlop card in existence. And that was reported by WXMI. John Dunlop was the top player in those days in 1894, and he won 4 varsity letters at the University of Massachusetts, and he later became the coach of the team. The last Dunlop card that was discovered was back in 2000. It was about 15 years ago. A Michigan family was cleaning out an old farmhouse after a family death, and they uncovered a notebook full of football cards and boxing cards. They almost threw them all away. However, after doing some research, they realized that they had in their possession the rarest football card ever, the card of John Dunlop. They found that card, they had it graded, and it graded a 3. That is the highest graded Dunlop card that exists. It's graded SGC 3. So as far as the printing of the John Dunlop card and the Mayo cards, 1894 Mayo cards in those days, they were all photographs. They were sepia photos. In those days, of course, they didn't have black and white pictures. I mean, they did have black and white. They didn't have color photos. So the sepia were the closest and the fanciest they can get to creating a color type photo. And nowadays, you see a lot of sepia cards, and some of them are valuable or short printed, but this was the original sepia cards. It's an actual picture that was taken. It was pasted on that card, and it's a pretty thick card, so you could see in the back. It's a thick card with a black ink in the back, and in the front is the actual picture, sepia photo of John Dunlop.
Go ahead.
So I want to thank everyone for listening to me and watching my YouTube video. This is my first YouTube video. It's about football cards today, about the rarest and oldest football cards ever made. The Beecher card, the first football card created, and the rarest football card ever, the Holy Grail of Football card, the John Dunlop Anonymous card. So thank you very much. I have more videos to come. They're all going to be about vintage cards, and they're coming soon. I'll see you all next time on A Collector's Dream.